presentation about effective altruism, which we will do prior to the giving game, which is about effective giving. But effective giving is a very important part of the effective altruism movement. This is the first time I'm giving a presentation in English, so please bear with me if you can't follow me, or else you can ask a question if I'm not clear. So, what is effective altruism? It's actually a movement that revolves around the idea how you can do good better. So, doing good better. Hence the slogan there. And it's a movement that combines both the heart and the head. So, instead of being only emotionally driven about philanthropic causes or altruistic causes, this movement also uses the head. So a little historical background for those of you who don't know what altruism is. Altruism was first coined by a thinker named Auguste Comte. He is considered to be the founding father of sociology, and he tried to create a doctrine of a religion of humanism. So that's why I thought, this being a humanist weekend, that it might be nice to introduce this guy. And he said that altruism is basically the opposite of selfishness, namely to live for others. The definite formula of human morality, he says, gives a direct sanction exclusively to our instincts of benevolence and the common source of happiness. Well, and effective altruism is also, hence the name, about effectivity. And you can see that when humanistic thought developed during the 19th century, rationality became a very important part of it. Also due to the scientific revolution, which you all know, I think. And Max Weber coined the 19th century as a process of rationalization. And rationality is a very important value which effective altruism also uses, and it tries to use it in a good way, because Weber and other also contemporary sociologists warned for the negative effects of applied rationality. It also has a very distinct philosophical background, effective altruism, namely utilitarianism, and this is an ethical way of thinking that thinks an action is morally right only when it conduces to the happiness of a lot of people. So Jeremy Bentham paraphrased it in the famous sentence to the greater happiness to the greatest number. And you also have another component of utilitarianism, which is negative utilitarianism, which is about reducing suffering. There are very famous and contemporary utilitarianists which use this way of thinking. They try to apply it in practical life, and a very important thinker in this respect is Peter Singer. Maybe some of you might have heard of him. Sometimes he's coined the most dangerous but also most influential philosopher of our time, and he is a very important utilitarianist, and he tried to apply this utilistic thought on everyday life, and he did this with the following arguments, namely that suffering and death from lack of food or shelter are bad, and that if we are in the position to do something about it, we ought morally to do it. And he goes on by saying that it doesn't make a difference if someone near me is suffering or someone really far away. And he wrote these arguments in a very famous article called Affluence, Poverty and Morality, in which he says that when you are a utilitarianist and you want to reduce suffering in the world, you ought to donate money to the poorest people, because then your money will go further. And during the time he wrote this, it was in the 70s, there was a very big hunger crisis in Bengali. He also used a very famous metaphor. Well, the metaphor has become famous to apply some force to his argument. He said, consider the following scenario. you're on your way to, let's say, a wedding, and you are wearing very expensive clothes, your most favorite expensive shoes, and you happen to walk by a pond. It's a shallow pond, and you see that a child, a very young child who is unable to swim, is drowning in that pond. But you are in the direct position to save this child simply by walking into the pond with no significant threat for your own safety or health whatsoever. But there is an important materialistic effect, namely that if you walk in the pond, your expensive clothes and shoes will be ruined, and you will look like crap when you arrive at the wedding. But, Peter Singer says, almost no one would say that you wouldn't ruin your clothes to save a drowning child. And then he said, so why, if we don't save a child that's drowning near us, why don't we save for the same amount of money we spend on shoes or expensive clothes or whatever luxury items, why don't we spend that on people who are in dire need? For example, the people in Bengali in the 70s, he asked. So this philosophical paper had a lot of influence and it became very important, and it inspired the birth of a few professional organizations who tried to apply his argumentation, his arguments in practice with these organizations, and they are based in Oxford in America. And one of the organizations Peter Singer's thought gave birth to is the Center for Effective Altruism, Giving What We Can, The Life You Can Save, which carries the same name as one of his latest books, and the organization called GiveWell, and I will tell a little bit about these organizations in a few moments. But first I will give a definition of effective altruism, which is the following. It is a movement that is using evidence and analysis to take actions that help others as much as possible. So here you can see this utilitarian type of thinking. It's about helping as much people as possible by effective means, and it's a movement that's driven mainly by rationality, because in order to find out which causes are most effective, in order to find out if causes are effective with analysis and evidence, you need to apply rationality. So they look at a few criteria, which are, these are the most important, namely, it helps many people a lot. Remember, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Effective altruists also look a lot at neglected causes, causes that other people aren't already taking care of. And this is very important because the effective altruism movement, the organizations which are founded, they found out that a lot of charities are actually overfunded. They don't have any more room for funding. They have a lot of money in the bank, but they don't use it effectively, or they are not using it at all, which is maybe worse. And they look at if some actions or interventions by charities, if they are tractable. And the result, well, and here follows another definition which might help. This is from an important book about effective altruism from Professor William McCaskill. Effective altruism consists, he writes, as the honest and impartial attempt to work out what's best for the world. So you see, distance, like Peter Singer said, if it's a child in a pond or a child far away, doesn't matter. It's an impartial attempt to work out what's best for the world. A commitment to do what's best, whatever that turns out to be. They are also driven by a few values, namely open-mindedness, which is the willingness to look at all types of causes without any form of bias. So they can look at causes that are related to diseases or other things, but not, for example, only problems which we have in the West, for example. It's impartial, like I said. It also looks, the application of rationality also requires critical thinking, of course, and applying evidence and reason. And last, global empathy with all sentient beings. So also concerning animals, which I will say something a little bit later. Right. What they also look for in a cause, skill. Will progress in the cause drastically improve a large number of lives, hence utilitarianism again. Tractability. Can a dedicated effort in support of the cause create a measurable difference? I will tell more about this too. And neglectedness, like I already said. And the result of this exercise is, the result of the application of these values and criteria led to a lot of research and comparisons between different types of charitable organizations, and what they found out was that the very best health and education programs are sometimes hundreds times better, or sometimes even 1,000 times better than other causes, of which I will give a few examples. Alright, two other people that were motivated by Peter Singer's thought were hedge fund holders, and they had a lot of money which they wanted to donate, but given the fact that they had a lot of money and were able to make a big difference, they didn't know where to donate. And they tried to do their own research about different charitable organizations, but actually found out that proof and transparency was lacking with a lot of charities. And since they could not find any good evidence for cost effectiveness of organizations or whatever, they chose to found their own organization named GiveWell, which professionally and very rigorously, some would say too rigorously, research different charities, of which they already have researched thousands since the year 2007, and they look at the following criteria to assess how effective a cause is, and if the interventions that the cause make really make a difference, a significant difference for people's health, for example. You can see comparable criteria as which I mentioned before. They look at evidence, cost effectiveness, room for funding, like I already mentioned, and also transparency. And then they ask themselves, you can read on one of the first pages of the website, what will the donation allow to happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise? Will the activity that the charitable organization is conducting change people's lives for the better, or will it bring unexpected changes? For example, in the past, one time fighting malaria in one region when they hadn't thought it quite true, in the 70s or 80s, it led to overpopulation and to more hunger. So you really have to take this type of things into account. Will it accomplish a large amount of good comparative to other options? So comparing is very important for this organization. And here is a very good example of ineffectiveness. Namely, we see a child with Cookie Monster, me so hungry, in a poor village. So thanks for the shirt, asshole. Right, so another organization that was founded in Oxford by also a philosopher named Toby Ord is Giving What We Can. And they also conduct their own research between different charitable organizations, and they try to do something, some other important thing, namely to create a giving culture. On this website you can register yourself as a member and promise that you will pledge 10% of your pre-tax income to the most effective causes that are recommended by GiveWell and Giving What We Can themselves. And yeah?
Not necessarily you need to give to the recommended charities. You have a free choice as long as you commit to give as effectively as possible.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for the correction. So you are free to choose causes, but they don't force you to give to the most effective charities, but of course they would like to recommend you. So these are some statistics of a few years back, 2 years back. Then it consisted of 900 members that took the pledge. You can see the amount of money pledged and statistics on money already moved to charities. These were figures of a few months back, and these were the figures last time I checked this week. Right.
It was the first. Can you switch back to one slide?
Yeah?
Yeah. Oh, for time reasons, take care.
Yes, I will. I'm almost finished. So, like I said, effective giving, as you already saw, is a very important aspect of effective altruism. And like I also already said, Give Well and Giving What We Can recommend different types of charities, some of which will be presented at the Giving Game shortly. And these are 3 examples of charities they are recommending. The Anti-Malaria Foundation, of which I will tell you a little bit more. They buy bed nets for $2.50, and 100% of the money goes to long-lasting insecticide nets to protect people from mosquito bites. Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, which fights parasitic worms in sub-Saharan Africa, also very cheaply, as you can see. It only costs 61 euro cents to protect a person for 1 year from parasitic worms, which gives very significant health benefits. And Give Directly gives the poorest families in Kenya basic income unconditionally to the poorest families in Kenya. So I would like to conclude with the following comparison in order to try to prove that some causes are indeed much more effective. So one comparison they did is between training blind guide dogs and treating people for parasitic worms. So say you care about the fate of blind people, which you should, of course. But when you want to help these people, you can donate to organizations to train guide dogs, which cost $40,000 for one dog for one blind person. And with the same amount of money given to deworming projects, you could cure over 400 to 2,000 people from blindness, because one of the health disadvantages of being infected with parasitic worms can be that you become blind. All right, that's it.
Okay, now we make things more practical, so you explained the philosophy, the theory, some major players in the effective altruism movement. Now it's time to play the giving game, or with sort of a debate. Suppose I give you 100 euros and you are free to donate that to a charity. Which charity would you choose?
Amnesty International.
Amnesty International.
Yeah.
You're doing great work, indeed. Other suggestions?
BHA.
BHI?
British
Humanist Association.
Okay. Yeah.
God knows they need it.
Doctors Without Borders.
Doctors Without Borders, yeah. I think they're very good at making a disaster a bit less bad after it happens. Yeah, disaster emergency help, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you may have all your good ideas to where the chair of the game. Okay, the rules of the game. This game is sponsored by an organization called The Life You Can Save, and the donor to the Life You Can Save made money available for this game, so we will discuss real money.